a face declarația referitoare la situația din Siria.
Thank you, Mr. President. This week marks the tragic anniversary of the Syrian war. It's been 7 years and the war is not over yet. After some encouraging signs of de-escalation in the second half of last year, we have been warning, as the European Union last month, about the risks of a new escalation. And we have tried to prevent it, mainly with our work in the Security Council of the United Nations that led to the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2401. What we see today is a dramatic re-escalation of the military activities. Afrin first, then the tragedy of Eastern Ghouta. And with every new escalation, a new level of horror is reached. In Eastern Ghouta, we have witnessed the intentional bombing of civilians and medical facilities and snipers shooting on those who were trying to flee. Now, there is only one rational and moral thing we can do. We can only keep working together with the United Nations to achieve what wasn't achieved so far. A political solution in Geneva as the foundation of a just and lasting peace. We believe the most urgent task now is to stop the fighting and bring relief to the civilian population. At the end of February, as I mentioned, the UN Security Council adopted unanimously, also thanks to our work, the work of our member states in the Security Council, the Resolution 2401, demanding a 30-day cessation of hostilities all around Syria, with the only exclusion of operations against Daesh and Al-Qaeda. At our meeting of the EU Member States Foreign Affairs Ministers, our Foreign Affairs Council on February 26th, we were united in calling for a full and immediate implementation of the resolution. And right after we met, the same day, I wrote to the foreign ministers of Russia, Iran and Turkey, the three guarantors of the Astana process, because they have committed to creating 4 de-escalation zones in Syria. And let me recall that Eastern Ghouta is one of these 4 zones. So they have taken a clear responsibility and we expect them to fulfil it. In my letter, I've called on them to contribute to the full and immediate implementation of the Security Council resolution. And this includes taking all necessary steps to ensure that the fighting stops, that humanitarian access is ensured, and to allow for life-saving deliveries of assistance and medical evacuations. In Eastern Ghouta, over 1,000 people are now in need of evacuation as doctors, medicines and medical appliances are lacking. Thanks also to our work together with the United Nations, on the first days of March, a UN aid convoy was finally allowed to enter Douma. It was the first aid convoy since November, and it brought some much-needed relief to thousands of people trapped in Eastern Ghouta. Our first concern is always saving lives, is always the humanitarian needs. But the shelling resumed while the operations were still ongoing, and the convoy had to leave before the aid could be fully unloaded. And this shows that a daily 5-hour truce can, yes, be a first step, but it is clearly not sufficient. Syria needs a full cessation of hostilities, as agreed by the UN Security Council. And it is also unacceptable that the Syrian regime removed critical medical items from the convoy in clear violation of international humanitarian law. As our diplomatic work for a truce continues every single day, as our humanitarian support to Syrians continues, we must also keep focusing on peace talks, on a political solution in Geneva. I know it is difficult to talk about peace negotiations and even more to engage in peace negotiations while thousands are still dying. But let us keep in mind 2 things. First, that peace is all the more urgent when the fighting gets worse. And second, that peace can only come from a comprehensive political agreement under the UN auspices. I believe we should have learned it by now. Limited agreements, yes, open windows of hope and limited improvement, but have always collapsed in the lack of a larger political agreement on the future of Syria. The new escalation of violence in Eastern Ghouta, but also in Afrin, can push further away the chances for a political solution to the conflict and can easily lead to an even more dramatic escalation, even in these hours. Now we need to concentrate all our energies in supporting and revitalising the UN-led negotiations in Geneva in a determined and consistent manner, gathering the efforts of all the partners in the region and in the international community. Support in Geneva will be one of the key goals at the second Brussels conference we will host on the future of Syria and the region at the end of April. We will gather the international community, the regional players, around three objectives. First, to renew our humanitarian support to the people of Syria, both inside Syria and in the neighbouring countries. Second, we will work on the recovery of areas where the fighting has ended, particularly the areas liberated from Daesh, bringing back services and normal life to communities, men, women, children that aspire to a sort of normal life. Reconstruction, as we said several times and very clearly, and we will repeat in Brussels in the end of April, reconstruction will only begin after a credible and inclusive political agreement has been reached. But the perspective of reconstruction can help the Geneva process, and this is why we continue to work also to prepare for peace, as the most powerful leverage we have to encourage a positive dynamic and outcome of negotiations. This is the third objective of, actually the first one, of the Brussels conference in April. Use our convening power, which is quite remarkable, together with the United Nations to unite a real international and regional consensus to give a political push to intra-Syrian negotiations in Geneva. Not because we are naive or blind. On the contrary, after 7 years, we know how difficult it is to end this war. And even those that have tried partial political avenues to gather different formats have realised very clearly the limits of this exercise. It's only through a collective UN effort that we can get there. But we know that it would be simply impossible to bring peace to Syria without everyone's contribution. This is why we are insisting on the strong political commitment to negotiations to be expressed in a united manner at the Brussels conference coming up in a couple of months from now. Because we cannot afford to stop working for peace, and it is exactly in the darkest moments that the work for peace is more needed. We, the European Union, do not give up on the Syrian people and will call to the rest of the world to do the same. Thank you.
Mulțumim, doamna înalt reprezentant. Dau cuvântul acum domnului Preda pentru 1 minut și jumătate.